Oh, hi again, Barbie. Hi. How was that? How do we feel? Isn't it just magnificent? Thank you so much for staying in your seats. We're gonna get ready with our Q&A. I'm so excited to introduce Academy Award-winning filmmaker Brad Bird.
Thanks for coming, and congratulations for just having seen a really unusual, fantastic movie. I'm here to introduce, I guess. I don't know, what does that mean? Anyway, this ridiculously talented actor, writer, director, Greta Herwig. This kind of sums up this last year, doesn't it?
This is amazing.
Yeah.
I'm literally getting flowers. This is so beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. If you think that you're going to escape without me making fun of the fact that you got an award for winning the box office, you came to the wrong place. So,
Yes, I'm ready for it.
yeah, well, that was like the congratulations on success.
Well, honestly, it was genuinely moving though, because the whole time we were making the movie, when Noah Baumbach and I were writing the movie, and when we were making the movie, the thing that we were most fervent and excited about was this dream of people going back to the movie theaters and being in groups of people in the dark, laughing and cheering and crying. So it felt fitting, because that was always the thing we had wanted, was people to be in a movie theater together.
Right, well, I mean, especially after the pandemic, when it seems to be pushing toward people getting in their own little, huts and staying apart and looking on small screens, and it was. I'm trying not to jump into the Barbenheimer of it all yet. I'm going to get to it, but it seemed like you were half of this perfect storm to get people back into the movie theaters, which is really exceptional and couldn't come at a better time, I feel.
Well, yeah, thank you. I mean, it was truly out of that thing you were talking about, of the isolation. We started writing the movie in earnest in March of 2020, and it felt like the world didn't exist anymore. And our favorite thing to do is to go to the movies, and they weren't making movies, and there was no movies to go to, and it did feel like it kind of lent itself to a euphoria of like, well, if we ever get back there, what's the wild thing we want to do? And so I think it kind of gave us this freedom, and I don't know. I mean, yeah, I love going to the movies. It's the thing I enjoy, and it's and I think the summer before, when like everyone was going to see Top Gun, and it was great. It was so wonderful to be in a packed theater, and it was, and that was, I had already finished shooting Barbie, and I looked around and I thought, this is so nice. I love this. I hope that we get that moment for this movie.
Yeah, well, I feel like the industry has, the business part of the industry has been waiting for the opportunity to get away from the movie theaters, because they don't like sharing the money with the movie theaters, they don't like being forced to advertise, they don't like the expense of sending a thing to various places around the world. They'd love to just press a button and have it go out. And this enabled them to, the pandemic enabled them to escape into that world. And now they're kind of going, it's got its own problems. And it's like, yeah, the being alone or being with strangers in the dark, looking at a giant screen together and having emotional experience together is really something special.
Yeah, no, it is. It is, and I also think because of the isolation in a certain moment, I think there was also a recognition of how much we crave it and how much we miss it. And I think there's so much, obviously, in our world that is set up, marvelously so for individualized convenience. And I think people remembered how much being inconvenienced is a luxury, and how much waiting in a line or being together. And I this is different than movies, but I go to the Met in New York a lot because I like looking at paintings, and you can see all those paintings online, and yet it's packed. People want to go see it because it's there, and because the piece of art is there, and they're excited to go have their own experience with it. And I think the same is true of the sort of collectiveness of watching movies. It's it's not that you can't get it another way, but there's a special thing to get it this way.
But it requires that you make an effort, movies.
Yes.
And you have to shut your damn phone off. The toilet can't flush, the dog can't bark. You lock in and you are committing to the next couple of hours to be in someone else's hands.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we can go on and on here and just go, movies are great, but we have some stuff to talk about. First of all, I just feel like, and this is coming from a guy who made a movie about a cooking rat. So, I'm not doing it for that. I'm just bringing up that Barbie, a feature-length movie about Barbie, sounds like it is designed to suck. And just like a cooking rat sounds like it's designed to be a disaster. And yet you've made this surprising, fresh, funny, smart movie. And how did you survive all the minefields to get this realized?
Well, I have to say, I love your film so much, and I do think that there is, in terms of storytelling in animation, it's to me some of the best examples of you really don't know where something's going. You don't know how this is going to make sense. I have many times in movie theaters and animation been brought on a journey that I could not have anticipated when I started, and I think that I don't know whether it's the form or the way that you write and work, but it kind of has this gleeful anarchy. That's the only way I can think to describe it, where it's things are allowed to spiral in different directions that you don't necessarily see coming. And I think when we were writing this, we equally embraced that feeling of let's go for broke. And I think one thing for us was that we didn't, other than that it was a movie and it's Barbie, we said we're not good at outlining or doing a treatment or anything, but we said if you leave us alone, we promise you we'll write you a movie.
And they went along with this?
Well, it took a little bit of convincing, but
you're living in Barbie land, man. This is not the way the rest of the movie industry works.
Well, I feel, for me personally, I actually feel like if I expose ideas to other people's opinions before they're fully worked out, it's the quickest way to make them shrivel on the vine. I can't, if I say, what about, and I'll have some idea, if I had said to someone, what about Barbie worrying about death? And they'd gone, ugh, then I wouldn't have done it, because right. I would have had their voice, and so I needed to allow myself to be completely ridiculous, because that was the way through. And I think sometimes the process of sharing what you think it's going to be before you've done it can, for me, it's a tricky one. But then, I mean, once we're in it, we write hundreds of drafts. It's not as if we don't go through the process of working it again and again and again, and then kind of outlining it once we almost have it, and then going back and refining everything over and over.
But that's you and Noah.
That's me and Noah. That's
okay, yeah.
And that's how I work, alone or with him.
Right, I get it. Well, it just seems like because there's a lot of money at stake when movies are made, it's not a cheap art form. I feel like there are a lot of committees, and committees don't make good movies. You know, I hate to say it, especially in these times. But I don't mean this in the wrong way, but movies kind of have to be dictatorships a little bit. And this is particularly terrible sounding now because democracy is being threatened. But democracy is not necessarily how you make a movie. It is kind of you imposing a vision and hoping you can get plenty of support for your vision, you know?
Yes, and I do. I think it is. I think that's why I gravitate towards so much being kind of left to my own devices. And I will say your reaction to what the Barbie is, that is the same reaction that Noah Baumbach had about the entire thing. And he didn't actually know, because I had talked to Margot Robbie because she had the rights. She was a producer, and she was like, I'm gonna make this, and do you wanna write it? And I said, yes, and then I had Noah write it with me because we'd written together before. And I sort of vaguely told him that was happening, but I didn't exactly tell him. And he kept sort of saying, are we doing it, or are you talking to them? And I was kind of like, well, we're just gonna walk along, and say, let's see. And then there was a Variety article that said, Greta Herwig and Noah Baumbach sets write the Barbie movie. And he texted it to me with a question mark. He said, what's this? And I was like, oh, whoops. We're gonna do this. But he kind of had that same feeling of like, how is this possibly going to work? And then I had an inkling, because Barbie has always been such a flashpoint for discussion and anger. And I always had there was something about me that when I looked at Barbie, and my mom didn't like Barbie when I was growing up, so of course I loved it, because that's what you do. I was thinking about, we're so advanced in some ways, and we have all this, robots and stuff. But there seems something very almost like medieval about our investment in dolls and inanimate objects. Mm-hmm. And I was like, the fact that we still have a doll that people are genuinely angry at or pleased with is so delightfully, insanely human.
Yes.
And what an interesting place to start.
Yeah, well, the fact that she's sort of a blank slate that you can project onto. But how does that work for a movie? I mean, in other words, then two huge problems arise. One, from a writing standpoint, how do you write somebody who's a blank slate? Because they can't stay a blank slate totally. The closest thing that I can think of is Being There, where Peter Sellers he grows this much in the film. It's a tiny, tiny arc. He basically is unchanged. And yet he was so good in that role that he made it interesting being blank. He made being blank interesting. Now, that's not what you guys did, because she actually undergoes a real arc. But she has to begin as basically an inch deep, and then you see her become deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's a point of suffering for her.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's so interesting you brought up Being There, because that was one of the for me a real touch point movie, and obviously one of the great endings of all time. It's just magical, and it also falls into the category to me of movies that are extremely high concept but extremely human.
Right.
And another one that falls into that category to me is Heaven Can Wait. Just something that is doing something that's quite writerly and inventive, and yet it just feels human. Like there's nothing about it. Like you go with what this kind of poetic license of the structure of the script is. I mean, the thing that I kind of came to in the first big scene that I wrote was sort of that I handed to Noah, that he thought, well, maybe there's something here, was actually it was like a very strange one-act, two-person play between Barbie and a woman who was dying, it was very sad and strange. And it didn't end up literally in the final movie, but there was something in it that felt...
That's the thing that the movie executives would have turned down.
That's why we don't show them anything.
Yeah.
It's because they would have been like, just don't change our phone numbers. Like, don't let her call again. But it was the thing that Noah said, you've got something here. And it made us excited. And I think the way I always thought of the story was almost like in a very old structure of a story of a spiritual coming into consciousness. I mean, the story of a person who lives in a place with no death, no suffering, no aging, no difference between your internal and external.
Mandated happiness.
But that is an old story, and then suddenly realizing that that's not what the world is, that's in a lot of traditions, and I think it's something that I'm a big believer in stories that people have deep inside them, and I think that is one that people recognize, that kind of coming into consciousness. And so that I had always thought of it that way, that it was a spiritual journey. I mean, and it does literally end with her accepting death, ultimately, that is going to be what that journey is. And even though it's funny and a hijinksy and all that, that's sort of at the core of it, to give something as seemingly superficial as Barbie a profound spiritual journey felt like reason enough to me.
Yeah, well, it's great, and what's really funny to me is while you're doing that, you're having Ken throwing the clothes out, and you're stopping the clothes in space to identify which model they are. So the consumerism button is being hit while you're doing the profundity over here, and it's really funny.
Well, I mean, that's such a Ryan Gosling is just so exquisite in that scene because he's so hurt, he's so angry, and yet he's completely obsessed with her because he can name all of her outfits fully, even as he's throwing them out.
Yeah.
And he's like, he loves her and everything she is, and I felt like with so many things in the movie, instead of shying away from that, the sort of consumerism or capitalism of it was like goes straight into it. I felt the same way about giving the character of Sasha the speech where she totally flattens Barbie. I'm like, let's just say everything, right? Because I feel
you want the audience to know you're aware of this dichotomy,
and also that that you can acknowledge everything and be in the mess of it and still find something worthy there. Like you don't have to mask anything.
Right. Well, there's an interesting thing with Mattel and Barbie and Toy Story where they wanted Barbie to appear in Toy Story, and they were turned down flat by Mattel. And then Mattel sat there and watched Toy Story become this big thing. So by Toy Story 2, Barbie's in it, And then that went really well, and so they brought Ken into Toy Story 3. And he was also like, it's Ken's Dreamhouse, or whatever, So, I mean, it's really funny, and I feel like if they hadn't had that experience, I think they probably would have given you guys a harder time. But because they kind of risked something, they went against their original instincts, which was to protect Barbie. from ever being an object of humor or anything like that. And they gradually got persuaded to maybe be a little more open-minded. But I have to ask, who was tougher to convince? Was it Mattel or Warner's or?
Strangely, the Mattel of it, the CEO of Mattel, Ynon, he had a ton of faith in what we were doing, which and there were certainly things that he or people on his team were worried about, and there were moments where we had meetings, but he had pretty unshakable faith that we were going to do something that was, even if it was irreverent, it was never mean-spirited. Mm-hmm. He kind of had a faith in that.
They didn't flinch like beaten dogs when you said patriarchy?
There were some discussions about that, but I think I guess, the script was so full of things to be potentially worried about that it was kind of impossible to decide where you wanted to go with it. And I also think, and you can't fake this, but I mean, once we had the script written, I loved it so much. I wasn't even really originally supposed to direct it. We were just going to write the script. And then as soon as we had the script, I loved the script, and I thought, I don't think they'll make this, but I'd rather them not make it with me than with anyone else. Like, I wanted to try to do this. But I also had this faith of being able to say, I don't need to make a Barbie movie, I want to make this one. And if you don't want to make this one, you can make a different one, that's okay. Right. But I really believed that, and I believed that this was the way through. But Ynon gave me a lot of faith. Warner Brothers gave me a lot of faith. I also had, Margot was a producer, and her husband Tom Ackerley, and then David Heyman, who's a producer, brilliant producer. He worked
Harry Potter, Hollywood.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Gravity, Marriage Story. He's a great producer, and he came in the sort of process of trying to get it greenlit, and he was extremely instrumental with Warner Brothers and talking to them, and he had a relationship with them long-standing, and that was another thing in making it happen. But actually, I know everybody always portrays there's like a sort of like a battle with the studio, but my experience with the studio and my experience with David and Margot and Tom and Robbie Brenner working within the studio is David and the studio in particular made up numbers to greenlight this movie. Numbers did not exist to say that this was a safe thing to do. And they went, because they create, I'm sure many in this audience know, they create models, financial models to say like, this plus this equals this amount of dollars.
Equals you have no chance.
Yes. And so they couldn't create it. You're not allowed to use certain things as comps. You're not allowed to, you can't use, like Disney princesses are their own categories, superheroes are their own categories. Oh, wow. So you can't use either of those. And so there's just, it's really difficult to create on paper a reason to do it. And it makes sense from a financial point of view because, movies are expensive and they're risky, and this is a big, it's a huge world building endeavor, and that's always gonna be a risk. But they tweaked here and there, figured it out, and presented something that everyone could get behind. So, and it, in some ways it just feels like a miracle that they figured all of that out, but by math, we shouldn't exist.
Right. Well, that's the difference between art and commerce, is like, I think that you have to say, what is the end result, and then backwards engineer it. I've had arguments about marketing like crazy, and they always go, we tested that idea and it didn't test well. And finally, a friend of mine who was an art director, did Incredibles 2, said, Well, we also did our own testing, and it went through the roof. So, and the guy all of a sudden was very frightened by that. And it's like, oh my God, they're onto me, you know? And we didn't do testing. It was just, you know, any more than he did testing, you know? In other words, they have what they want to do. Usually what they want to do is just, please God, let me keep my parking space on the lot. You know, that means I have to survive another year. And, you know, I mean, they've got their own problems, and I sympathize. But at the same time, we're trying to make movies here. So, you know, there's no logical reason for any of this stuff to exist.
Well, also, I mean, even though it's, you know, separate from the movie existing, I mean, I remember the very first time we had a teaser trailer that we put out, and it was kind of it was a compressed version of the 2001 opening, and there was a lot of trepidation around it because it was strange. You know, it's a strange...
Little girls are smashing things with babies.
Yeah, no, everything was, you know, it was, you know, there was a lot of like, oh God, how's this gonna go? But the way I figured is, I'm like, but that's the movie.
Yeah.
I don't know. If they don't like it, they won't like the movie. So we might as well show what that actual movie is. And that's sort of how I felt all the way through. And I think, I mean, my experience with the whole team was actually a lot of faith in it, which I know. I think when I say that, I know it's rare, and I'm very grateful that it happened. And I do have to also, Margot is stalwart. She is, as a producer, I sort of know her in two ways: as actor Margot, who's a complete genius, and producer Margot, who is equally a complete genius. I cannot believe they're the same person.
Well, I think starting with her coming after you, I think that was an amazing, a really smart thing for her to do. One of my favorite, probably my favorite Disney feature is Pinocchio. And I feel like there are similarities here because it's about a wooden creation that is trying to become real. And you know, how did Margot as an actress calibrate the growth? In Pinocchio, I always cite it as a brilliant piece of animation when he goes onto the puppet stage of the puppet theater, because everything is new to him. So when the spotlight first hit him, he goes like this, like it's a bad thing. And then he sees that it's focusing people's attention, so he kind of goes like this into it. Then people start to applaud, and his first reaction is, what the hell is that? And then he gets a feeling that it's good, and he starts clapping along with them. So it's a piece of animation acting that tells you that everything is new to him. And it's genius. And there's a lot of similarities with Margot here, but she has to calibrate it over 2 hours. And how did you guys do that?
Well, I'm always so happy to talk about her as a performer, because I think what she does in this movie is so amazing. It's such an incredible hat trick, and it looks effortless that it almost feels like you could not acknowledge what an incredible feat it is, because, you know, she never drops a plate. Like,
right.
she never, you know, there's not one thing in a movie where she's playing Barbie that you think, that seems fake. Like, you believe all of it. And you believe someone who doesn't have an interior life, and then you believe as it starts to appear to her. And I don't totally know how she did it, because she almost constructed a literal plastic self who is not, the thing about Barbie is she's not vapid, she's not stupid, she is literally unconscious, and then allows that to crack, and then you watch her over 2 hours that it falls away, and then another person appears. And I felt like what I got to do, I mean, we talked a lot, we rehearsed, we worked on it, like she found specific moments where she incorporated something that looked doll-like into her movements. I mean, Rodrigo Prieto, who's our cinematographer, yes, the great Rodrigo. he and I worked a lot with the camera language between the Barbie and the way the camera behaves, especially in the beginning in Barbie Land, is that there's nothing, there's no shame, there's no hiding. Everything is fully framed frontal, like everything is revealed. Because what would you possibly need to hide? And the camera, the way the camera moves, is very mechanical and very innocent.
Right.
And there was something about her performance which is totally exposed within that. And then the moment when she says, "Do you guys ever think about dying?" And then it's almost like she stops the movie. And I've never quite seen anyone do something like this, but in that moment when she said that and then looks around, it's the first time she's ever been out of step with the world around her. And that is...
Scares her.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
Terrifying. And that terror is something that just keeps happening and building. It's like, it's almost like slowly watching, I don't know, the sunrise, where all of a sudden it gets, and then you're like, it's day. How did it become day? And that's how I feel watching her performance. You couldn't pick the moment when the light shined. You just knew when it was there.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think we have like just a minute or two left. I had 3 older sisters. They all got Barbies, and I felt cheated because I felt like, hey, I need a guy. They got girls, I get a guy, right? So my mom's sweet woman that she is and was, she got me a Ken, and I didn't know what to do with it. I just kind of like, I don't really want to. What do I do? Now I got it. And like a couple of years later, they figured out G.I. Joe, but isn't that funny that we had to make the male guy a destroyer, and then that's marketable.
Yeah.
When did you hit on the idea that Ken only had meaning in relation to Barbie?
Well, that was actually really early in thinking about, Barbie was invented in 1959, and she's, Barbie, and she's fabulous. And that Ken was created as an afterthought, 3 years later, because he looks good with her stuff. I mean, it's like genuinely, and then the even sadder is Alan, who is the afterthought of the afterthought. And Michael Cera is dressed in the original Alan outfit with the slides and everything. And on the Alan box, so on the first Ken box, it says Ken. He's Barbie's boyfriend. He has no reference to himself other than Barbie. And then Alan, it says Alan. He's Ken's buddy, and it's like he's twice removed from agency.
But all of Ken's clothes fit him.
And then it says all of Ken's clothes fit him. And you're like, if Ken was the saddest man in the world, Alan is just, this is a tragedy. And I thought, one thing I thought was, it amused me that it's a total reversal of like the Genesis story of like, Adam was created, and then out of Adam's rib was Eve. I thought it was so funny that the creation of Barbie was just totally flipped, yes, and that everything worked the other direction. But then when Noah and I were writing it, we really started to consider Ken's plight, and we started to take it extremely seriously, because he doesn't have a house or a car or a job or anything.
He has beach.
He has beach, which feels unimportant. But when I talked to, we wrote it for Ryan Gosling. Like, I wrote it for an actor that I just knew would take it so seriously, and in taking it seriously would be so funny. Like, I didn't know him at all, but we were writing his name for months and months and months, and it was designed for him. And the first time I got on the phone with him, he told me that that he has daughters and they have Barbies, and he said to me, he read the script and he was nice about it, and then he said, and I thought to myself, I know they have a Ken somewhere, and he looked for the Ken, and he asked them, and they were like, we don't know. And then he said he found Ken face down in the dirt under like a squished lemon. And he was like, I must tell this story. And I was like, that's exactly right. No one has ever thought about Ken. This has been torture for him. And I felt like it was a place that, you know, and that's why we couldn't have come to that without the writing process we had, which allowed us to discover that. It was it kind of like thinking about all these characters and investing them, allow them to be surprising. And instead of telling them what they are, it's like you let them tell you who they are. And I find that all the time in writing. That's why when, you know, it always feels a bit mysterious to me, because it feels like it came from somewhere else. It's not like I'm designing them. They are. I think writing is so much listening, and it's listening to your characters.
Land on your nose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So we're out of time. I have so much more that I would like to talk to you about. I'd love to talk about Ruth and the scenes with Barbie, which really moved me. I'd love to go into Gosling's whole thing because he's hysterically wonderful. But I'll just leave it with congratulations on all the success.
Thank you.
And, you're a fabulous team.